Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our 30 on Thursday webinar, SharePoint 2016 and Power Apps Revealed. Just a little bit about Protiviti before we get started. We are a global consulting firm that helps companies solve problems in finance, technology, operations, governance, risk, and internal audit. Our Enterprise Content Management Solutions group is within the IT consulting group within Protiviti. Protiviti has over 3,000 professionals in 70 offices worldwide. Our 30 on Thursday webinar series is a 30-minute webinar series where we talk all things SharePoint and Enterprise Content Management. Our next webinar will be on July 14th. You can register for this webinar and see our full schedule on our website, ecm.protiviti.com. For everyone on the call, we are offering free 1-hour introductory consultations with our on-demand SharePoint support. Our SharePoint support team provides performance troubleshooting, system health checks, Nintex workflows, design, business intelligence, and more. If you are interested in a 1-hour free consultation, you can schedule one today by emailing the email address on the screen, or you can learn more on our website. We are doing live tweeting today during the presentation. Please tweet us your questions and feedback during the webinar at ProtivitiECM and make sure to use the hashtag 30TPowerApps. Today's session is being recorded. We put all the recordings of our sessions on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ProtivitiSP. You'll find an archive of all of our past sessions there as well. For questions during the presentation today, please insert them in the question window in the GoToMeeting toolbar, or you can tweet us your questions again using the hashtag 30TPowerApps. We will save all the questions until after the presentation today. Today's presenter is Liam Cleary. He is a 10-time SharePoint MVP and Associate Director here at Protiviti, so we are very excited for him to be presenting today. And I will hand it over to you, Liam, and you can take it from there.
Okay. Okay, so just checking you can see my screen.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so let's get straight to it. So as most of you know, on May the 4th, Microsoft had a SharePoint Futures event, and at that event they presented their vision and roadmap of all things SharePoint going forward to kind of belay some of those questions of, is SharePoint still going to be around? Do we still focus energy or money on SharePoint? So some of the things that were talked about, well, firstly, the whole purpose of the event was to launch officially SharePoint 2016. So if you've not had a chance to play with that yet, it's now available for you to use. You can put it in production. There's even patches to go on it, but it's there ready for everyone to use. Lots of demos and presentations were given around file and collaboration on any device. The future is really moving away from the old way of working where predominantly you were tied to the browser and or the Office application. Now obviously with most of us using mobile devices, tablets, cell phones, whatever it would be, now we have the ability to do this file and collaboration on any device, anywhere, anytime. Along with that came the introduction of the SharePoint Mobile application, and this is something that's been talked about for quite some time. The idea of having a native mobile application, an iOS one, an Android one, and a Windows mobile app that will allow you to connect directly to your SharePoint environment, giving you that true, rich experience from any device, anywhere, instead of using the browser, which obviously isn't the easiest to use on a mobile device, but using a feature-rich native application. Obviously, they talked about the new SharePoint Home, which probably by now, some of you have probably seen this already. It's now starting to roll out through the tenants. The idea of moving the home page to be more based around kind of Delve cards, focusing what you see on the home page versus you having to try and guess or really think what you want to see. The machine learning code behind the background, the Delve technology, the Graph API, is now going to do its work and present you the content back. Big talk about the SharePoint Framework, the ability to build solutions differently Obviously, we've had many, many different ways of building SharePoint, but this one is moving to more of a lightweight type development where we're going to use things like Node.js and Gulp and all those things that web developers have historically been using for some time. And the framework will be out towards the end of the year, but obviously there'll be more information to come. But this was a big move forward to get us into a way of building things a little bit easier. Also, a side note, it kind of maps very nicely to the patterns and practices pieces that Microsoft have worked really hard on for the past few months to give us official guidance of how we should be developing things. So if you want a sense of what the SharePoint framework will ultimately be like, start to look at some of the patterns and practices pieces that are already there. And then, of course, PowerApps and Microsoft Flow. And these were kind of two things that appeared from nowhere. They'd been around as codename projects for some time, but all of a sudden they just announced them right before the SharePoint Futures event and then made announcements that they would be integrated into the SharePoint Office 365 stack, which is great news when you start to realize what PowerApps and Microsoft Flow are. So what's Microsoft Power Apps? Well, the tagline that they have, one thing you'll notice is when you go to the websites for PowerApps and for Flow that they have these taglines, and the PowerApps one is apps that mean business. So this is the ability to create apps for those mobile devices that you have very easily, but more importantly, it allows you to consume other services such as Office 365 or some other third-party supported service. Now, of course, you can't just connect them to anything, and there are a list that you're able to use. And of course, what's great is you get different entry points. So on Windows, not just Windows Phone, but Windows OS, we actually have a fully rich desktop application where we configure and create the Power Apps, and we'll look at that shortly. And then, of course, we have the mobile apps for Windows Phone, iOS, and Android. And then, of course, we have the web access. So we have these different ways of connecting into the system. The web access is allowing me for management to be able to go in and see the applications. The mobile apps allow me to log in and then to present applications to me on the mobile device. And then the desktop application is all about the actual building and creating of those apps. Now, in conjunction with PowerApps, Microsoft Flow was launched, and their tagline is work less, do more. I actually really like that one. That's going to be my new mantra for the next year, work less, do more. It's automated workflows between apps and services. Now, don't misunderstand that this, is going to replace SharePoint Workflow, because it probably won't, because SharePoint Workflow is very contextual based to SharePoint. But what this one does allows you to tie the dots between the third-party services that you wish to use. And it's template-based, where you can either start from a blank template, or you can create them and then create quite complex processes that are connected to all of the services that reside within Office 365 and some other ones that are supported. So the logic here is, I suppose, think of it more as a service connectivity framework that connects everything together. And these are created using the web console itself. So I'm just going to come out of this, and then we'll jump straight into the web browser. So I've gone and accessed powerapps.microsoft.com, and after you've bounced around logging in and authenticating like we get used to with Office 365, we ultimately end up with this page here, where we have the ability to see any apps that we've already provisioned. So these are the sample apps, some information about how they work, and more importantly, we can click on My Apps, and it will list out the apps that you've officially created that are now available. We also have access to flows as well. So there's a seamless integration between Power Apps and flows. So if we just go back to Home for a second, if I look at these, I can click Service Desk. As soon as I click one of the apps, I get the ability to open it either for a phone or a tablet. So that gives you an idea of where these apps are targeted. They're not targeted at, I want to render it in a browser and do something at the moment. They're just purely tied for tablets or phones. So if I click Phone, it's going to redirect in the browser and will then load itself directly in the browser, so we can see how this app would work if I rendered it on a phone or I rendered it on a tablet, depending which one we chose. So we'll give that a second to load. Now these ones here, those 4 sample ones, are provided by Microsoft, so it gives you an idea of what these apps can actually do. They do come with sample data, so they can take some time to actually download and get rendered in the browser. It should take a few seconds longer. There we go. And so this gives you an idea of what you would expect on a mobile device. So obviously you can see the form factor. You can see I have the ticket numbers, I have different things. I can click on the tickets. If I go back, I can say show me all tickets. And you can see it's just a very simple app, but it means I get full interactivity all the way down through here. I can add comments if I wanted to. I could then save and it would write back the values. So it's something very simple, but it's an app that I can then present to other people within my organization. So that's just an example of what standard ones look like. And if I go back here, I can go to My Apps, and you'll see the ones that you have. But more importantly, there's a button at the bottom called New App. So if I click New App here, you'll notice that I'm not able to do anything in the browser. I actually have to have the PowerApps Studio installed, which is actually something from the Microsoft Store. So I'm going to close that, and I actually already have that here. So here's the PowerApps Studio. You'll notice those 4 sample applications. We're not going to download these. And you get some basic information. You can edit them. You've got, obviously, I can assign them to users. And then I get details and download and share them with others. Because the idea is here that you, as the person creating them, would then provision them into your tenant, and then you would determine who needs access to these apps. So when I actually log into the PowerApps iOS application on my iPhone or my Android phone, it only shows me the apps that are specific to me. So if I click New, I can then choose to create something from existing data, so OneDrive, SharePoint Online, CRM. I can go through a whole host of different things. I can create a blank one, or I can actually use an app template. So if I choose, for example, a phone layout, this is now going to go and get me the list of templates that are available, and these are the 4 that that Microsoft have provided. So I can actually use this as the basis and say, create me something that's a service desk, use the Microsoft sample data, and then I can actually change it. But if I go back to New, we can choose something different. So I could say Dynamic CRM, for example. And then notice what it asked me to do. It asked me to connect to that service. Now if we look over here on the left, you'll see there's a few more options available to us. Azure Blob, Box, Dropbox, FTP, Google Drive, all those different things that we can connect to with our accounts. Now, of course, you have to have accounts to be able to access this, and you would probably need to have higher access in order to connect to that to then be able to allow other people access to it too. So if I go back here and do New, I can pick any one of these that I already have connected. I can choose a blank, which we'll do in a second. Or in the Connections tab, I can have a list of my connections that have been created. Let me just close that. The browser opens up really weirdly. I can list my I can list my connections that I have access to for my Office 365, my commercial, business Office 365, or even my regular Hotmail or Outlook.com connectivity too. So we're going to create a blank one. I'm going to choose a phone layout. And you'll see we're presented with a kind of an office-looking application. Now what I'm able to do is I can create the screens. I can choose layouts. So you'll see we have predefined layouts for my application. So if I was building, I don't know, for example, an application that was going to be showing houses, let's say a realtor application, I could use this predefined one here, and this would give me an image. I can select the image, and then you'll see that we get contextual menus based on the objects that we connect to. So as I connect to a text box, as I connect to another text box or an image, you'll see it changes across the top here, and this tab becomes valid. You'll see also we have the little arrows, which are basically shapes, and then if we just drop this down, it's very much like a very minimal type Visual Studio property type manager, where I can define what each of these components actually do. So I can also click here where it says plus. You can see it's an image, and I can then define an action. So on select, or navigate when I click on something, and then you can choose the screens and how you want to get to that other screen. So if you want to do a nice fade in and out to the next one, or you want to slide it over the top or make it magically uncover itself, then you have control of those screens. So if I go back to Home, for example, and do New Screen, this gives me Screen 2. I could go here and say that when I actually go there, it says Navigate to Screen 1. I could actually say I want to navigate that to Screen 2 and then change the transition from fade to something else. And you can see it's got this kind of IntelliSense built in. So you don't have to be a developer. That's the big win right now, is there's no development needed. You just need to understand the kind of the basic functionality that's available. I can click the FX and it will give me a list of different things that I can do, different functions. They're very much like Excel type functions of things that you can do with values. Now, of course, if I wanted to apply an action, then of course I can go through and say on select, and I could still use one of those. I could expand it down to an action type value, and you'll see that I can go back, I can clear, I can connect, or I can really have lots of different types of functions that are available. So think of like a glorified Excel spreadsheet, just controlling how the application gets built. Now, of course, I can add data sources directly into here. So I could say data sources, I could say add a connection, and you'll see that my list appears even longer than it was in the previous piece, where I can choose those same things. So not only can you create an app from a data source, but you can actually add it in later if you define how you want to build it. So let me just close that down. I obviously can choose a theme at this point. So I can go through and choose that one. Lovely colors. So we'll go with that. And then, of course, on my other tab, I can then start to insert pieces. I could say I want to insert a gallery of images and have it rotate between them. Or I could add charts. I can do a pie chart. So if I choose a pie chart here, you'll see that I can start to add quite rich information into my application. So let's say that we've created our application. I know it's fantastic, this one. I can actually click on here where it says preview the app, and then it allows me to preview, and obviously my app doesn't really do anything, but you can get how it's going to look on a mobile device directly in the application. Once you have your application done, then of course I can go through and define the settings. I can give it an app name. I can change the screen size or the orientation. I can choose an icon for it. So let's say orange, and I could browse for a file, or I could just use an image. And that's my app already done. So I can now click Save. I'm going to call it Test 1. I want to allow others to actually access that app in my organization, and I can click Save. So this is now going to save it directly into my PowerApps, I suppose, tenant piece of Office 365, which now means that if I just minimize my application and go back, you'll see that my browser in the background has refreshed automatically, and you'll see that it's now available. So I can actually click on Test, like we did on the Microsoft one, and open it in the web browser in the special player, and once it loads, it should load those 2 pages, and you should see the app working. Wonderful orange color. There we go, this should load, and we should be able to see what my application looks like. And there's my wonderful green color with my scroll, and obviously I don't have any other clicks on here because we didn't connect anything together. But you'll see that I have the ability to test those apps. So let me just close that. Once we have the apps in place, then of course I can edit in the studio, which will take me back to the application. If I wanted to share, then I can go in and say I want to share them with specific individuals. I can enter names and addresses. I can say can use, can't use, whatever it would be, and I can send those to other people. I also get access to the details, so if I'm trying to look at what the application is, I can actually populate this value. Now, of course, if we wanted to associate flows to that one, if we go back to my desktop, for example, here, and let's say we design, let's add, insert a button. There we go, a nice colorful button to my application. If I then do an action and choose flows, you'll see in the right-hand side, the flow comes up and then it's going to take me through to the browser. It's going to ask me to sign in. It should sign me in automatically, and I should get passed all the way through. Obviously it's not on here, so we'll use the browser to do that and associate back the other way. But I can click button and it will take me through, and I can then create the flow, which if I go to my flows over here, I can click create new flow. And they all associate backwards and forwards. I can choose how I would like to start. Notice there's lots of connectivity between the two, so HTTP, Swagger, PowerApps. So I can say I want to create a PowerApps one, and then I can create an action or a condition. So I can say I want to say, well, in a condition, some object in PowerApps is going to do something. Or what I could do is say add an action, and then I'm able to choose what I would like that action to do. I want to go to Instagram and get my recent media. I want to send a new mail campaign using MailChimp, or I want to go down and do translate something or get something from Office 365. So I can go through and select various values. So if I wanted to create an event, for example, this is going to go ahead and it will connect into my Office 365. I'm unauthorized right now. I have to refresh to obviously go back. I can do change connection and choose a different account. I can go back and say create new and sign into a 365 account to be able to get access to create those contents. So if I just go back to my flows, this simple one here is all about just sending an email when something is added into Office 365. Now when it spins like this for some time, what you'll find is that we've already authenticated, but under the covers it goes and gets a reauth token. So I'm using my SharePoint site, and I've told it to use my share documents. So when something is created, I want it to go and get my profile in my tenant, and then I want to send an email to me that basically says, go and get my email address from my profile, tell me that a new file's been added, get my given name, and then send me the file name and the path. And that's straightforward. What it could do is then add more information. I can then say add a different condition, add a different action, and of course I can scroll backwards and forwards. I can then choose load more, and we'll get even more and more and more. So building a Power App and building a Microsoft Flow will help you tie those two things together. All right, let me just close that down. Let me go back to my desktop. So in the connections, so once I have my Power App, obviously my flows, if I was authenticated in the other browser, it would allow me to associate that flow directly with the button, which I'm then able to use inside my application at that point. So let me just come out of this and go back to my browser. When the flows have been connected, you'll notice we have the on-off switch at this point, where we can turn them on or off. They basically work, I suppose, like an event receiver type, where it's associated to it. When something happens, it runs, or you can turn them off at any point. You have the ability to edit them directly from here. You can delete them, or you can actually go through and list the runs that have taken place. I'll wait for that to load. There we go. You'll see that my test ones have failed because I haven't actually put anything in there. But you'll see that I can actually run through and say, check successes and failures, successes, successes and failures, or failures. And I can go through and see them. And if there's any information that SharePoint comes back, it will say, oh, I had some question marks about the things, it wasn't connected or it was connected. And you'll see it gives me some error information that you can see. And the first one over here comes through and says, service is unavailable. It can't connect to that site, probably based on an authentication token. So we get some great debug information about the two. So if you think of how you tie this together, you create your application as a Power App that is connected to various services within Office 365. So let's say it is, I upload something into a document library, I want to have an email, or maybe it's an incoming email that you want to put into SharePoint. So vice versa. Once the flow is created, then you can store it and you can look at the debug information. But if I'm also doing something in a SharePoint app, so if I'm on my phone and when I do something in my Power App, it kicks off a flow, then we get both tied together. Now, of course, in the future, what's going to happen is that things like the flow components and Power Apps, such as like the service desk piece, for example, these will become available directly inside SharePoint itself. So let me just come back to here. So based on Power Apps and Microsoft Flow as being some of kind of the big things that I kind of like, there were a lot more features announced at the event itself. Now, I'm not going to run through all of these, but you can see these in the slides. These are the sets of features that are hopefully going to make it. Microsoft have said and committed that these will hit in the third quarter of 2016. And if you look through that list quickly, you will notice that things like Power Apps and Microsoft Flow haven't quite made it into this third quarter. But you will see things like the mobile app, the new SharePoint Home, lots of other insights, some of the underlying plumbing to make Power Apps and Microsoft Flow work. Because, of course, if you didn't notice, the one thing that is interesting about those two products is that they're not connected to SharePoint in any way. They are completely separate. When you think the logic through, wouldn't it be great to be able to go to a list in SharePoint, create me a Power App directly from that list, have it available on my phone, that when I do something it kicks off a flow that goes and does something in lots of other services or applications. So these are the features that will hit the third quarter. Now if we look at the ones that will hit the end of 2016, now we start to see Power Apps and Microsoft Flow integration hitting with SharePoint. Obviously there's lots more coming, different integration, different organizational, and of course lots of things around the SharePoint framework. Of course, after that, there's also things around the security space to do with encryption keys and more security control and classification. So that kind of gives you a quick run through of all the pieces that are due to hit at the end of the year. And for me, Power Apps and Flow are some of the big investments. The rest of the features that are hitting are more around a different development way or more around a better user experience for those user type access. So coming into the SharePoint site, accessing document libraries. Of course, you notice that the synergy between a OneDrive document library and a SharePoint document library, they're now becoming the same, and everything is moving to those card type things. So a couple of resources. The first one is you can go and view the on-demand video of the Futures event at this link. You will need to register, but you can actually go and view that, and that will give you some of the videos, some of the demonstrations that were given. If you want to look at all of the Future of SharePoint videos, which are under the Office Mechanics YouTube channel, then you can go and access these. There are lots more there than were actually showed at the event, but you can look at Power Apps, Microsoft Flow, you can look at the mobile app, the new page rendering, the new SharePoint framework. There's a whole bunch of extra videos that are there. So I will turn it back now to Julia and for any questions.
Great, thanks Liam. If you have any questions, please insert them in the question window of the GoToMeeting toolbar. We do have a question here. Are Power Apps and Microsoft Flow only on tablets and phones?
Right now, yes they are.
Okay, great. And yes, we will be sending out the slides and the recording link when it's available, so we'll probably be following up sometime early next week with those once we get the video rendered and uploaded on our YouTube channel. If there's any other questions, please insert them in the question window. All right, I think that's it for now. We are at the top of the hour, so thank you, Liam, for the presentation today. That was a lot of information about SharePoint 2016. We will be following up with the recording and the slides for everyone who's interested in rewatching. We will see you on July 14th, and thank you, Liam, again for the great presentation. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.